Deep within the earth, deep within your mind, envision that scene and that seed.
Hello, and welcome to AM Light, the universal mind at work, dealing with astrology, metaphysics, religion, science, and art. And we have, as my guest this session, a fabulous artist, and I'll tell you a little bit more about her. Beth Urabe is going to be here, and you'll meet her, and we'll talk about her work once I get through my intro. And there are just some special things that I want to bring out about her. She is a world artist and has had a very interesting journey that we'll use part of with the show. And I think you'll see from the paintings that we have right there is something that is very special. Now, first of all, how did the show begin? Okay, I have guests with different perspective but similar views of the universal mind at work. Okay, and it goes back to my being a child when I used to spend days up in the tree in my backyard and looking up at the stars, looking up at the sky and wondering and trying to equate and put back its relationship to the earth. And that led me into other things. Led me into the curiosity about life above and below. It led me into astrology and the cosmos and spirit and wanting to go into space, which I never quite made. And I always laugh because my brother is a geologist and he had the option of becoming an astronaut and going off to the moon and the planets, but he chose to stay on Earth so he could work with the Earth. Anyway, let me introduce you formally now to Elizabeth R. Urabe, my guest, okay? And as you can see from her radiance and her color, the color is very much a dominant point of her life. And it's also a very dominant part of her perspective. Now, this is her book called Warrior of the Spirit. And we'll be spending a lot of time dealing with this as she talks about how her painting evolved and what it says. And somewhere down the line, I will tell you a little bit about my own experiences. But keep a lookout for this, and her information will be on our graphics, so you'll have a chance to do that and contact her. And she and her husband have a shop out on 69 called Kobe Collections. It's actually 2nd and 1st Street in between there. But it's a wonderful shop if you have things you like to sell and collect, and I would say go. But now, let me take you back to my guest, okay? Now, Beth wrote the book, Warrior of the Spirit. And the picture that we're looking at is the divine unity. And that particular painting won first prize in the 2011 American Spirit in the Heritage of the Batik Design Competition. And for that, she took a journey over to Indonesia. Mm-hmm. And when we get this graphic set up, we'll have some clips of her in Indonesia and winning and the things that were centered around her time there. So you'll get a chance to see just what it was that she was able to do and her own experience. We'll get into that a little bit too, okay? I won't go into all the details about the businesses because that'll be up on the screen and you can look at it from there. But I will let you know she's a Pisces, she's water, she's mutable, and
Aries.
You're Aries. Okay. Then I have the wrong focus there. Okay. And this is what we're going to look at.
That was my mistake.
I have to redo her chart then because it's not going to be the same thing.
It definitely won't be accurate if you've got me as a Pisces, yeah.
I don't know how I got the Pisces.
April, remember? My birthday was just a couple weeks ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I was wondering why I had the Pisces there, but my head wasn't put together. So I'll have to have another one done. okay, because I think
That'll work.
I have it written down. But the Pisces is there, too, in her. Okay, Pisces deals with spirit. It deals with flexibility. The Aries puts on another dimension because Aries is fire, okay? Aries is ruled by Mars. Aries is something that is very cardinal and out there in terms of leadership, which is pretty much what Beth does, okay, in so many different ways. And I apologize because I kept looking at that and saying, well, gee, that didn't seem right. But I have to go and
Sorry,
check.
I didn't catch it when I was looking through the notes. Yeah,
I
wasn't
think
sure
maybe the person I gave the info, I had asked for a progress chart and may have mixed it up. So I have to go back and before I do a reading for you and Cody, I have to make sure I have the right thing. Okay. And I don't know how that happened. Anyway, let's go with our Aries. And she's being an Aries was able to direct me back to the place that we needed to go. And I wondered, I kept saying, well, gee, I didn't think she was a Pisces. And at the same time, I should have checked, and I didn't. But
okay.
I will, and I'll redo it, and then we'll talk about that, because she fits the Aries very well, even with a bit of Pisces. So I'm sure when we look at the chart, there'll be some Pisces direction there, too.
A lot of my artwork has water in it, so
That's
might
exactly true, okay? And we'll talk about that, and that's what I want to start with now. I'm going to use a quote from her book, This Warrior of the Spirit. It's a very, very interesting book, and something that if you can get online and get it, there's a number to call, there's a number on the website to go and purchase it. And I think you'll be amazed, and I'll tell you a little later about my experience that I think is so intense. But let me take a quote from the book, and then we'll kind of get into how this all began for her, okay? And the quote from the book says, "Life is a journey of the evolution of the spirit. At some point in the course of each person's life, something that will happen that will bring about a 180-degree shift in the way he or she perceives reality. When this shift takes place, we begin to remember that the answers lie with us. We begin to take our true power. We begin to remember that our purpose is to love," which is a very strong statement there. "And we begin to remember who we really are." And this is a strong focus through the paintings and what she's gotten out of it in her direction with that. But I asked her to share some moments in her life that this happened for her. She has a fascinating background, so we'll see which one she wants to deal with in terms of working out that. But it is basically an interesting life. So can you give some of the moments in your life that this happened to you where you made a totally different transformation and change?
It's definitely an ongoing process, but when I was looking through your notes just to get an idea about the kinds of questions you were going to ask me, two experiences immediately came to mind. The first one was that in 1985, I was living in Tokyo, Japan, and I'd just gotten married, and my husband and I had gone off on our honeymoon to the Philippines, and we anticipated being gone for several months. Well, we ended up having a terrible time coming back to Tokyo just in time for me to take a meditation intensive with an East Indian meditation master. And as I look back on it, the only metaphor that I can use is that when you encounter a being who is fully enlightened, they light the candle in your own heart. We go through lives lost in the maze of our own minds, and we don't even know that we're lost until that light gets lit. When the light gets lit from within, suddenly, instead of looking outside in books, instead of looking for answers from other people, a path very naturally starts to unfold from the inside out. So that one experience of encountering this master who lit the candle within my heart was the first experience. About a year after that, of trying very hard to do everything I thought I was supposed to do correctly, I began to have this very strong feeling of needing to make a trip to India, to the ashram where this meditation was practiced. And the only problem, so to speak, with that was that I was married, I had a 1-year-old baby, and I was getting the sense that I had to go for as long as 3 months. This is just what my inner voice was telling me. And of course, my mind is fighting with this because it didn't fit into the way life was unfolding. Well, it got so strong, this feeling that I had to go, that I just knew if I didn't, I would die. That's how powerful it was. It didn't feel like a choice. It absolutely felt like something that I had to do. And I made my reservation, and I went to India, and a whole bunch of things happened. I was there for 90 days. And when I came back after that 90 days and tried to fit back into my life, over the course of the next few years, what I realized was that in making that trip, I had broken the 3 main roles that I'd gotten stuck in. Daughters didn't go off and leave their families the way I did. Of course, I started off as a daughter. Wives did not go off and leave their husbands. And mothers certainly didn't go off and leave their 1-year-old babies to be taken care of, even if it was by dad. And in the process of doing that, of actually taking that trip, what I did was I shattered those 3 roles in my own mind, and it put me back in touch with just a pure energy, which I began to realize was who I really was. I'm not here to be a role. I'm not here to fit into other people's expectations of what a good wife or a good mother or a good daughter is. I'm here to be me. And who that is might very well be very different from what those external roles said I should be. So those 2 experiences coupled together, it took me probably 10 years after coming back from that trip to really understand that that's what had happened. But I started to get a sense of who I was just from a pure energy point of view, not to define myself by any roles that society might be comfortable with, but just as the energy of what I was and what I felt 24 hours a day.
And that concept of energy is going to be very important as she goes on to talk about how and what she does with her painting and how that happens. So, and it's very, very interesting to hear the story of what's going on. Can you cite another example, perhaps? And I'm doing that simply because it reveals some of the things that you talk about through your book in the art. And I just figured you might pick up on some of the others as we go into the other quote. But
pretty much, as I look back on my life, all of the decisions that I've made haven't really been decisions. I'm not one to think about anything for a long time. This might sound crazy, but I went to the college that I went to because I thought I was in love with the quarterback on the football team of the small school that was in the same town. That's actually what consciously brought me there. Even though it was a very good school, that wasn't why I went there. I was sort of following this dream. When I graduated from college, I moved to Japan basically because I didn't have anything I wanted to be when I grew up. I just discovered that it was very easy to get jobs teaching English over there. I had studied Japanese in college, and I just made a couple phone calls and got a job and got on a plane and went over there. When I think about the biggest decisions that I've made in my life, it wasn't so much that I researched it and thought about it and tried to decide intellectually if it was the right thing to do. My heart said do it, and I learned quickly that if I followed those leads, even if it was initially very difficult, those experiences made me stronger, and they gave me a much stronger sense of being able to act on what my heart said as opposed to what my head might say. And that's another theme that's very, very important running through my life and through the art, is learning to distinguish between the voice of the ego and the voice of the heart, or the voice of something external like society and our relationships with other people, or what our own spirit is telling us to do. So that thread was there all along. The process of becoming more and more conscious of it is something that's a lifelong job to do.
And that's very interesting because in telling that story, it pretty much focuses on some of the things that you say in the chapters of your book, okay, and how they became. And we're gonna go over those chapter titles, and you can explain again part of the experience that you had through that. And as I said, it's an incredible art form. It was stunning, and I had looked at. In their shop at Kobe Collections, she had her paintings up, and I was drawn to them and fascinated by them. And even looking at, I had her warrior book for a little while before, and that too gave me some insight. But it wasn't until I sat on the floor in her house, purposely choosing that, to look at the paintings from their original form, that I got the power and the energy of it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So let's go to the chapters of your book. And I'm going to put them down and ask her to relate these chapters to the journey that she did. Okay, in one way. Still doing. We're all still doing. You're right.
Very much still unfolding, yeah.
And the chapters are, and we'll start with awakening. Okay, what took you into that space? I think part of what you just said did that. So
absolutely, any spiritual journey, and that's of course what we're talking about, is it begins with awakening. It begins with when the moment when something enters our minds that everything isn't, even though it seems to be, it's not physical. There's something going on more than what meets the eye on the physical level, and that happens for people in an infinite number of different ways, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's one of the most important things to understand. It can happen in a church, it can happen sitting by a brook listening to the water, it can happen playing with your dog, or it can happen by actually physically meeting a spiritual master, as I was able to do. And when that awakening process takes place, everything that we think we understand starts to shift. And that's very scary, because as human beings in physical bodies, we want to have a sense of control, and it's scary when all the rules change on us. But one of the things that I've really come to realize over the last 30 years of being consciously on my own path is that when we get to a feeling of having mastered one particular level of the journey and we get lifted to the next level, all the rules change. And it feels like you're starting all over again, and it's very frustrating. You want to throw a temper tantrum. You want to say, God darn it, I just had it right, and now you're changing all the rules on me. Well, that process of awakening, it's not just the beginning. It's a circle. You awaken, and then the second chapter, as I know you'll get to, is healing, and then there's the transformation and reintegration. But it's an ongoing circle. And that awakening process, as a moment in time, is when that one experience happens that we can actually pinpoint and say, that's when I realized I didn't know. And it keeps coming back in one form or another as we progress, but it certainly isn't a stage that ends. They're all very much intertwined and dancing with each other constantly. So.
And that's the interesting aspects of her pictures when you get to see them. And if you were to get the book or just to pick it up and look at it, it's fabulous. And go to the collectibles, Kobe Collectibles, because she has them on the wall in there, forms of them, and you'll get a better chance and a little more focus to see them. And as I said, I was drawn to them, but I never knew the intensity of it until I sat on the floor and was looking at them, and I said, oh, wow, this is really, I understand what she was saying and what she was feeling. And I think that's a very good part of that awakening. So we awaken many times in our lives, not just
constantly,
once.
Yes.
And it's always through sometimes a major event that takes us to the next level. Sometimes it's a minor one too, but it's there. Now, let's go into the healing chapter. What in the healing do you focus? And if there's something that you feel, it's hard to put this up because we don't always have a close view of what's in there. But there are pictures in the book that deals with each one of those. And as you can see, they vary, and they're all in a different focus, a different sense of things. And this is the one for healing. So it might be interesting for you to take a look at it and see, and just find out about the book, because it's available on the website and by phone, too.
Or if people come into the shop, I have copies of it available in the shop as well.
That's probably the more ready part of it. Okay, go on, and I didn't mean to put you down. So.
The concept of healing is a very interesting one because, of course, it has different levels as well. Again, as physical human beings in bodies, if something hurts, if we break a leg, if we're sick, we tend to think of healing in physical terms and see the physical body getting better, so to speak, as proof that healing has taken place. From the spiritual perspective, that isn't necessarily true. Many, many years ago, back when I first started my journey, I did and read a book called A Course in Miracles. And it's very long. It sounds like you're familiar with it. I did the whole course, and to this day, there are still many quotes from it that are very significant for me. And one of the most important ones was a quote that says, "Grace is given not to a body, but to a mind." Grace is given not to a body, but to a mind. And in the course of my journey, that's been very important to me, because I truly believe that the mind is considerably more powerful than the body, and of course the spirit is more powerful than the mind, but the body reflects what's going on inside us, and the process of healing is much more one of the mind than it is of the body. When things get to the physical level, it's because we've ignored, I believe, what's happening on the inner levels, and the body is just the last stage of something in us yelling, come on, pay attention, you're ignoring me. So when I think about healing, I think of it from the inner perspective of really becoming at peace with our minds so that from there we can have a peaceful perception of the world. The world doesn't exist separate from how we see it. You have your movie, and I have my movie, and I'm responsible for the healing of my movie. We can both look at this cameraman Archie, for example. We're going to see something totally different. There's a reason for that. Archie's who Archie is. You see him the way you see him because of your movie. I see him the way I see him because of mine. If there's pain in my life or in anybody's life, it's because of what's going on in my mind, and that's where that healing needs to take place at a very deep level and then coming out into the physical world. So I don't know if I answered your question specifically, but there are different aspects to healing, and it's important to be clear about which one it is that you're speaking of. I tried to address it from, unless something gets taken out by the roots, the problem is going to reoccur. And this power that I'm calling grace is, if you've got the courage to follow it, it will get a problem out by the roots and it'll disappear. And you do need to go deep enough for that to happen.
And that's very interesting, because I've, in terms of looking at this and watching this, and in terms of just certain parts of my own investigations, I see that too. We have the tendency to think it's just the body that's doing it. Mm-hmm. But if you go through, and I guess this is why a lot of the indigenous people were able to deal with a different sense of it. They were able to go in their healing methods and use some things that when we started with our medical focus and all the medicines, we forgot about that. Yet, I think in our time, more and more people are going back to that original healing processing, starting with themselves, starting with natural things that will help them and move them forward.
Well, the question, let me interrupt you. The question is, what is the purpose of life? If we're at the level of our evolution where we honestly believe that the physical level is all there is, then it makes sense to be concerned only about physical health and focusing on what you eat and exercise and all that. If you've evolved to the point that you understand that the purpose of life is spiritual evolution, it's remembering who we are, it's becoming enlightened again, then your focus, you understand that the body is a tool for that, and you take care of it for a different reason. Your goal is not pleasure of the body per se. It's, if you want to get from point A to point B, you put good gas in the car to get you there. Well, that's kind of the way I am. I enjoy good food when it's cooked for me, but I don't go chasing after it for the physical enjoyment of eating it. I put gas in my car in order to make my body strong and healthy to be able to handle the energies of what's really important to me, and that's growing spiritually and doing whatever I can to help other people achieve that as well, because that's something eternal. Our bodies are going to return to the earth. I don't like to use the word die, but our bodies are part of the physical nature of the world, and when we're finished with what we have to do with them, they will return to the earth. If we think that's all we are, life is a very scary process. If we start to get back in touch with the fact that there is a spiritual essence of us that never dies, the more you focus on that, the less frightening the physical world becomes. And everything falls in line with that higher purpose as it grows within your consciousness.
I understand what you're saying, and that's becoming more of a pattern in today's society too. And it's people are taking a little different walk than they used to when they felt they had to go do this and do that. And the healing always becomes a very transformative focus. And if we can get to the point inside of us that tells us why, then we can heal the physical part of it that's causing the problem. Okay, now let's go on to the third part of this, and that's transformation and regeneration. Now, you have led into that in several ways in just the stories that you've told. Is there anything particular that you want to say about that is, going to share your idea? Anything at all?
Transformation and reintegration. When I think we've gotten to a point within ourselves where we know that, it's not that everything is healed. There are always going to be issues to deal with, but you get to a point where you want to share what you've gained, not because you haven't done it yet, but because it really is a solid experience. And what I mean by that is, like, sometimes when we read a book, we get an idea that we know is true, and it's very exciting. And the first thing we want to do is run out and share it with the rest of the world. We want to do that because we haven't really mastered it yet, and it's our egos pushing us to go out and have somebody else tell us what a wonderful idea that is, and lift the responsibility off us for actually getting to the point of living it. And I actually have a wonderful experience that is related to this. Early on in my journey, the master of my lineage gave us a very powerful statement, and she said, when you have an experience of particular import to you spiritually, wait at least 2 years before you share it with anybody. I thought that was very interesting. And the very first time that I was at the ashram in India, I was out one morning, and I'd been there for the 3 months. This was the trip that I told you about. And it was 4:30 in the morning. I'd been doing everything by the book. I was getting up at 3:30, and I was meditating, and I was going to the chants, and I was doing everything I thought right. And I was mad because I wasn't enlightened yet. I mean, the 3 months were almost over, and I wasn't there. And I was walking around in the dark at 4:30 in the morning, and I remembered a quote that I'd read from one of the other masters of the lineage, and he had said that if you're truly receptive, anything can give you a teaching at any point in time. It doesn't have to come from a person. It could be from a bird or a flower or even a piece of fruit. And I was walking around feeling very angry and very frustrated, and I walked past a mango tree, and this huge mango fell to the ground, and it spoke. And it said, "When fruit is ripe, it falls naturally from the tree." And I realized I'd been taking a kiwi fruit, which I likened to myself at the time. Kiwis take forever to get ripe, and I'd been beating it up and making myself feel badly for not being enlightened yet. I waited 7 years before I shared that experience with anybody, and then I had the opportunity to do it at a group of devotees of this meditation. And it was so powerful after the 7 years of actually living that experience and practicing it and not sharing it before I understood what it really meant from the inside out. So,
that's very important, too. I mean, that whole concept is good because it, again, takes us into ourselves and says it starts with us.
Exactly.
We have to start with all of our healing, whether it be physical, mental, or emotional. And that's something that is not always the easiest thing to do.
The bottom line is you can't help anybody else until you've let yourself be helped first. And we're all too busy trying to do that. We're so afraid to look at the pain that's inside us and to deal with it directly that we're out there trying to solve everybody else's problems. It doesn't work.
You're right.
It doesn't work.
You're right.
Yeah.
And this is her picture of transformation and reintegration. And you can see the vivid use of color in all of these things. And this is just, again, we don't have the whole thing, but this will give you some sense of how she sees that. And the use of color in what she's doing with this, too, it's fabulous. It really is amazing. All right, let's go on to any other thing that you'd like to say in reintegration? Anything else that you feel is part of this?
Just the level of when you get to the level that I'm calling transformation and reintegration, it means that we're ready to take all of the tools that we've been given, all of the progress that we've made, and actually manifest it in our world. And this is very much a stage that I'm in the middle of right now, and so I understand the difficulty of it, but just having it inside isn't enough. In one form or another, if we're here on this planet, we're meant to share what we've learned and what we've achieved and what we've attained with other people, not force it on them and not try to make them do the work that we ourselves haven't done yet, but to share it. And depending on how powerful or how revolutionary or how whatever it is that gift that we have is, it can be very scary to share it. And that is something that I'm personally struggling with right now, because I realize that a lot of the things that I say will strike people wrong in one way or another, but isn't that what life is all about? You know, when I told the story about going off to India and leaving my one-year-old baby with her father, I'm not advocating that every young mother do that. At the core of anything I say is the belief that we should follow the command of our own heart, not listen to what somebody else has said and go out and use that as an excuse to do something. There's a big difference between running away and moving toward your truth, and only you can know what that is inside yourself. And sometimes people will agree with you, and sometimes they won't. You still have to have the conviction to follow what your own heart is telling you. And that's what the whole transformation and reintegration part is about. Not caring. It's not that you don't care, but that you value your own connection to truth more than what anyone else says, or even more than what your own mind says. It's having the courage to act, even if your own mind has a problem with it. Yes,
I think
that's very hard.
This is the picture of the journey of the heart in this chapter, and I think you can see there again the power of it. And this is a two-panel one. Uh-huh. Okay, so if you were to see it in its one form, it would be much longer than it's here, and again, very intense. So that's Journey of the Heart is something that I think is very much a part of this whole experience. And when you read the book and when you see her art, you'll understand it. And in terms of the transformation Okay, this not transformation, the metamorphosis. What and how does that fit in to your perspective? What are you saying through that? She wrote
the poem. Yeah,
she wrote a poem, and she has a picture there with it, but it's just the poem. Shall we read it? Do you want to read it?
Go ahead, yeah, go ahead and read it. Yeah, I'd like to hear you read it.
This is called Metamorphosis, and it concludes in some ways the book. Wrapped up in the web of what you used to think you understood, you took comfort in the strings that bound you, held you tight, kept you from questioning. Why does the caged bird sing? Why does it not open the door to its cage and fly away? Because it is within the confines of the cage that it learns to recognize and to trust in the unique sound of its own individual voice. To leave the cage is to leave behind forever the belief that you are ever alone. Within the skies of freedom, there is nothing for the ego to attach itself to, no illusion to cloud the perfect blue of divine truth. There is imperfection in the being of a caterpillar.
Read that again. You left out the most important word in that sentence.
No illusion to cloud the perfect...
The last
there is no
imperfection. You left out the no.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
There
okay.
is no imperfection in being a caterpillar, in the being of a caterpillar. But when its time comes, the butterfly will emerge. And that's, in understanding what you're saying, makes sense. And I wasn't sure what... you tell me how that fits into what you understand. I think you have in many ways, but if you can just summarize it again for us.
Well, the last two sentences are the most important, and it was an interesting little Freudian slip there that you left out the, the no, because, of course, again, as human beings, we always feel like we're looking for imperfection, we're looking for things to fix. But the understanding that every step of the way is divinely perfect, not necessarily perfect according to what we think is right and wrong or what our minds think should happen, but the concept that everything is divinely perfect exactly the way it is means that it's all working together as a whole in ways that we can't see and understand. You know, if you use the ocean as a metaphor, it's got lots of waves in it, and sometimes one big wave will overpower the other wave. And sometimes they'll fight, and some are bigger than others. There are many comparisons in the waves, but the ocean is a whole. And as a whole, it's got an integrity that knows what's going on and can understand why all of those movements are taking place. Well, with the metaphor at the end of that poem, what it says is that the difficulties that we encounter are going to happen. We're not supposed to be fighting them and trying to make them different or to change them or even to see them as wrong. We're supposed to experience them. 100%. Move through them consciously. Fighting against it makes it into this big opponent that makes it feel insurmountable. The ability to just be conscious through that experience, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, is what allows us to become free of it. And I remember you sharing with me that you had never had a child, but for any woman who's been through childbirth, I think she understands that when the contractions are very strong, if we resist them, if we resist the contraction, it's painful. If you flow with it, it's just an incredibly powerful energy force. And I remember when I had my first baby, going through that the midwife actually thought that she was going to be born 24 hours later than she was by timing the contractions and going by the book. And I knew this baby was coming, and when I looked back on it afterward, I realized that it hadn't happened the way she thought because I wasn't fighting the contractions. They were much more powerful than she anticipated, judging by the time, because I was allowing myself just to go with them, even though that sense of being afraid of the immensity of the energy was there. And I took that experience with me into the rest of my life, and anytime anything happens, even if it hurts, even if I hate it, even if I'm throwing a temper tantrum and wishing it would go away, at the core is the understanding that I have to be conscious through it and not try to numb myself to it, and that in that becoming conscious, what I'm doing is reintegrating that energy back into my being by giving that consciousness to it.
That's very important, and it's something to keep in mind, because so often when we're going through moments of crisis like that, we all go through that energy of fighting it and not having that trust that what we experience is there because we're learning from it.
And the fighting against it is what makes it harder. You know, to come back to the question of control, I don't think any of us has and I'm sure if we're honest, we'll admit this, we don't feel like we have any huge amounts of control in our life over the important things. It's the little things that we can control. And with the intensity of everything that's happening in the world right now, what I feel like is that I'm riding on a tidal wave, and it's something incredibly powerful that's just rushing me forward where it wants to take me. And my job is just to balance, to keep my balance on top of this wave if I want to get to where I'm going as smoothly as possible. Now, I can fight. And what's going to happen if I fight? I'm going to end up in the middle of the wave, and it's going to toss me and turn me and dash me against the rocks, and it's going to hurt. But am I going to still get to where I'm going? I'm still going to get to where the wave is taking me. The only choice I have is, do I get there balanced gracefully on top of it, or a bloody mess because I fought and ended up in the middle of it being thrown around? That's where our choice is. Do we travel gracefully, or do we resist the process and end up being bruised in it? That's the control we've got. Not so much where we're going. The wave is going to take us where it wants to take us.
Okay, and one of the questions I had here was, how do they relate to your journey and ours as the humanity? And you've done a very good job of sharing that and bringing out these things. And they're very, very accurate, in at least in terms of my experiences and some of the things that I've been going through recently and all the rest of it. And I remember when she came back for a while there, she was off in a different direction and was just adjusting, coming back. And we'll be talking about her experience in a few minutes, so you'll understand why it was sort of something she had to get through and
You're
work
referring
through.
to the trip to Indonesia?
Yeah. Okay, and that's part of what's helping her to move forward and helping her to understand what her next step is. And as I say, it's an incredible perspective that she has, and the way she brings it out, and the way the art brings it out. And I truly say to you, sometime if you have a chance, go out to Kobe Collections and take a look at some of them. And if not, just pick up that Warrior of the Spirit book, and you'll find that on our graphic later on, so you'll see the address and what's there. Because it's an incredible truth, and it's something that we sometimes don't see in quite the way she's been able to experience it and bring it forth for us. So there's a lot to learn in terms of the Warrior of the Spirit, and it's a lot different than you think sometimes. Now, I'm going to go to Indonesia. I have her talk a little bit about her experience there. And she was a winner. It was something that she was awarded. And I would like her to share, if she can, some of the experiences that were there. And basically, I'm going to start with a question that she may not be ready to answer yet, but she at least can give somewhat of what she's learned in this last processing. And that how has becoming an internationally known winner affected your life? Can you give us sort of at now perspective on that?
My external life isn't very, very different at this particular point in time. As far as the trip to Indonesia, it was almost surreal, because from the perspective of being one of the winners of the competition, because I live on a mountaintop in the middle of nowhere, Ash Fork, Arizona. Our nearest neighbors are our daughter and her children, and I live there with my 5 chihuahuas and don't see people. Well, in the matter of 36 hours, I was transported to Jakarta, Indonesia, a place that a year ago I hadn't even been aware existed. And we had 2 different press conferences with Ambassador Dajjal, who is the ambassador to America from Indonesia. And they introduced our designs for the first time in that country as the winners of this American competition. And we were received as celebrities. There were people wanting our autographs. There were 10 different newspaper people with microphones wanting to interview us. There were TV cameras around. And I felt like I'd been transported into somebody else's life, even though it was very natural at the same time. That aspect of it was as if I was being fast-forwarded into something that's coming. I do see and feel myself as being a public figure in one form or another, because I've got this ability to translate energies into forms that are easier for people to understand, whether it's with words or whether it's with the art. I think that I'm an interpreter in that sense of things that are formless, and I put them into a form appropriate to the person who's listening or viewing and make it so that they can understand it a little more directly. So that being in Indonesia and being thrown on the stage and feeling like a rock star, as my husband is, they're teasing me at home and telling me I'm like a rock star now. That was one aspect of it. Coming back, I'm aware of the inner energies that are preparing me for the next step. And it's not anything that I can really put into physical words right now. I've just learned to recognize when the door is open, which is the right one to walk through, and I will when that happens. And there are many irons in the fire. I actually have a company over there that is right now working with my designs to translate them into fabric. So that's very exciting.
Oh, wonderful.
The pronunciation, by the way, is batik. I know that's a strange word, B-A-T-I-K. And again, you pronounced it a little off in the introduction. Don't feel badly, because I had no idea what it was a year ago either. But it's pronounced batik. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a fabric that goes back about 1,500 years in Indonesia and Malaysia in particular, and it's done by waxing and dyeing, very, very intricate. They have to take the fabric, get the drawing onto it, wax out everything except one color, and then dye it that color to get the. So if you take this design, for example, I don't know how they did it, but it can take a year or two just to do a single piece of fabric. And this fabric is very much interwoven into the culture of the country, and what they're looking to do right now is globalize it. And that was where this whole competition came about, was to allow an American designer to have the chance to see what they could do with this age-old tradition, but have a flavor of America in it. So,
well, that's very interesting. And batik, I don't know how I pronounced it before, but I do know, and a lot of times when I'm talking to people, they're not familiar with batik, and this is where it's something that I think you've done a good job of sharing how and why and what they do, and it's a very complex process.
Very complex, yeah.
And I think this is what is going to be, as it becomes more exposed through the media coverage, through your interviews, through other things that happen, to getting it out there. And it's an incredible process. As I said, I had seen the pictures, and I had been in the shop and saw the paintings there, but it wasn't until I actually, I don't know whether it was just the environment, sat down on the floor at her home and saw the originals that it stunned me. And not stunned me, but captured me totally with what she was saying. Okay, and that's about the energy, and that's about the sense of just connecting in an inner source of energy with what she is visually writing, or not writing, but showing us there. And it's fantastic. And I have a feeling that as it becomes and gets out there, more and more people will attempt to do some batik, and it will become perhaps a little more obvious in terms of what is available.
As far as doing it, it's not something that the average person would even have the patience for, but I honestly feel that wearing the fabric, because the process is so intricate, the energy of the person making it goes into it. And we had the opportunity to visit a huge mass production factory in a city called Solo, and they had 2,000 people working, and they have the men doing the hard work, the physical labor aspect of it, of which there's quite a bit, and the women do the very intricate work, which can take, like I said, it could take a year to do a single piece of fabric, and they do every little dot by hand and the waxing, and what they're doing is they're putting their love and their time and their patience and their history into every little piece of that fabric. And when you wear that's what you feel, is the history and the connection to the artist and the connection to the colors that they're putting into it. And they have a fabric for newborn babies and for folks who are getting married and for men becoming men and women becoming women, and fabric batik that they wrap a body in when it's being laid to rest. And the energy of, again, the entire country is in each piece of fabric that's made. And so from the perspective of, why I'm so excited about the idea of my designs being made into fabric, if that energy is actually tangible in that fabric, a person will be drawn to the design that they most need in order to uplift themselves energetically or spiritually, and be able to wear it as clothing and have those colors that soothe them or stimulate them emotionally. So you're actually wearing a source of energy, not just something that's pretty red carpet kind of thing, but it's actually a source of your own personal power. That's very exciting to me.
Well, that was what I in my experience there at your house, felt in the sense that it just amazed me. I meditate, I do all kinds of things, and I'm pretty sensitive, too, in terms of feeling things. And as I said, I had looked at it, I was drawn to them by the colors originally, okay, and the design patterns. But when I sat down there and worked with the original copies, I could just, my whole body, I hadn't planned on it. I was sitting there, and all of a sudden, as I'm sitting, my whole body is reacting. And I thought, wow, this is a pretty intense focus that was able to come out. And makes me wonder now, what if I were to see batik again in some store, how I would respond to it. Because what you're saying is what you're trying to say through your particular form of creativity. And the energy is there. And it is there because no matter who we are and what we do, our energy does get involved with it. Whether
Absolutely.
we're baking, whether we're carving, whether we're painting, whether we're dancing, it's our energy that speaks to us. And this is one of the power plays of having this around, this source around, so that you can, as you say, put it on and feel that comfortableness of it.
That's such an important point, because what you just said is something that I'm very fond of stating, and it's the energy that's the true gift. There's so much gift giving in a physical form in this country when you think about birthdays and Christmas and the cards and all of the expectations, but the true gift is the energy of what's given. It's not the object. And if somebody gives you a present, no matter how beautiful or how expensive it is, and they're only doing it because they feel obligated to do it, it's like giving you an empty box. And by the same token, if you really understand that, I could never give somebody a birthday present in their life, but in the ways that are significant to me, I give them the gift of my energy, and they appreciate that and take it as that gift. So, the external should never be a substitute for what really matters, and that's the heart and soul and feeling and energy of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And of course, when those two things come together, when the intention and the energy are there and the gift matches it, then you have the perfect gift. But never forget that it's what's at the core that really matters. And that the gift, the present, the physical present, doesn't make up for that not being there.
You're very right about that. And I just through my own personal experiences, I know that when I choose something, I choose it from the energy that's there within. I don't always know why I'm choosing that particular piece, but it's what I feel is necessary for the individual to have in one way or another. And this is a good insight, because this is exactly what's happening throughout this whole process, and that's the amazing part of it. Well, let me just go on here and ask another question or two, and I think you've answered perhaps both of the two questions I have, the most memorable moments, and how this affected your vision in terms of what you want to accomplish. Can you take a moment and give some perspective on that? Do you want to add that, or would you rather just let it go?
One of the most memorable moments has absolutely nothing to do with the batik or having been a winner or anything like that. We went to four or five different places, and the last place we went was to an island called Sulawesi. I learned a lot about Indonesia. I wouldn't have been able to pronounce that 3 months ago. An island called Sulawesi and a city called Makassar. And we only went for one night, and we didn't really understand why we were there, but we got taken to a school where the school children were actually learning batik. They were high school students. And they spent 5 or 6 hours a day learning the process of batik, and then they did their regular classwork for another 5 or 6 hours after that. So they were in school 6 days a week, about 10 hours a day, doing what they loved to do. And we were Americans. They probably hadn't had a lot of contact with foreigners, but when we walked by them, they looked up at us, and the smiles on their faces and the light in their eyes was just absolutely captivating. And the only way I can phrase it is that they looked you in the eye, and they smiled from the heart. And I remember coming home and reflecting on that and thinking how different that is from the average high school in this country, where you have to worry about who's carrying a gun and who's doing drugs. And it just made me think about the differences in the cultures and where our focus is and what's important to us. And Indonesia, it's a crazy country in a lot of ways, and there are too many people, and there are 17,000 islands, and they have trouble governing it. But at the core, there's a balance there, and I can't help but feel that in the same way that people talk about India, that they still are in touch with what matters the most, and that's that we're human beings, and we're here to love each other, not to compete with each other, and not to prove who's better because they have more money, and to remember how to smile from the heart and look somebody in the eye because you feel good about who you are and what you're doing in your life. It's those simple, elementary things that matter most as human beings, and when you act from that place, then you can be a 15-year-old high school student having no fear of smiling at a foreigner while you're, even as a young man, there were two men doing the batik, which is traditionally women's work, sitting there doing this painstaking work of learning an art that's 1,500 years old. That was one of the strongest memories, was the look in the eyes of these high school students and how happy they obviously were with who they are and what they're doing in their lives.
That must have been a beautiful experience.
It was.
And
really
hearing
was,
you say that there were 17,000 islands there just stunned me.
I know.
You had mentioned that to me once before, but
yeah.
I'd forgotten. And then when I heard you say that again, I mean, it's incredible. Are all 17,000 of the islands inhabited?
Not all of them are, and of course there are 5 biggest ones. I don't know the details.
Right. I was just curious.
But there are a lot of the equivalent of nomads. There are actually many people who live on boats, and they float from one island to the other, and they fish, and that's where they get their source of food from. So there's an incredible variety. There's jungle that is just completely, Borneo is part of it. There's jungle that's completely uninhabited, and then there's Jakarta, which is now the 10th biggest city in the world. So as a country covering 3,500 miles, actually I think it's bigger than that. It's bigger than the United States. Everything is there. Everything is there, from major metropolis to islands that are just as beautiful, if not more so, than Hawaii, because they're untouched. Hawaii has very much gotten spoiled by how many people have visited it in some ways. Indonesia is much more unexplored than that. So very magical place, yeah.
Very interesting. Let's go on. I want to use this as sort of our closure in some ways. Not our closure, but it's closure within your book too, okay? And I'm going to read that and ask you a question about that. And what you say is, these pictures are one of the most powerful reflections of source energies available to mankind at this point in the evolution of human consciousness. And when enough of us have to value spiritual energy more than physical material objects, they will spread all over the globe by millions. Do you want to elaborate on that, if you can?
There are several levels to that quote that are particularly significant. As I told you when you were at the house the other day, to make a statement that, and the words in there are very carefully chosen. They're one of the most powerful reflections of source energies. It's very significant that I put the word reflection in there. I'm not claiming that these pictures are the source. I'm claiming that they're a mirror for the source that is within us. And that if your goal is to grow spiritually, then to use these pictures as a mirror to reflect back to you what is in you that you might not be aware of, they're an incredibly powerful source. Now, to make the statement as strong as it is a part of my own personal struggle and my journey, because I realize that by stating it the way I have, I'm putting my neck on the chopping block. I'm not just saying that in the closet in my bedroom, locked in there to myself. I've actually gotten to the point where I'm willing to say to the world, this is my conviction. I believe that these pictures are one of the most powerful reflections of source energies available to us right now. And I'm putting that out as a challenge, to whatever degree any of us is afraid of stepping up and being a warrior and being the best that we know that we're capable of being. I'm saying stop being afraid. Get off your butt and do what you know you came to do, and do it with the most integrity and courage that you've got. And what I'm trying to do is make that statement and be an example of that. Even though it is admittedly a little bit scary to say it, because I don't know what's going to happen as a result of it. It matters more to me to live and speak my truth, even if that leads to problems down the road. That's the essence of what integrity means to me. So
well, that's very powerful and very meaningful, and I was given our time. I'm going to use your statement here. Rise up and take your eternal place as a warrior of the Spirit. It is here your seeking ends. Do you want to explain the power of this? And whether I left out something in this or not?
No, that's okay. Each of us is a warrior of something. And what that something is again a matter between us and our own heart. I know that I'm here to challenge people. I did that long before I even was conscious of what the word meant. I would just come into people's lives and things would fall apart just by the energy of what I carried. And for many, many years as a child, I would feel guilty. I would feel like I had, destroyed something that was very important to them because change seemed to be left in the wake of my having passed through. And what I came to understand is that that's what my gift is. Life is constant change. We're all climbing a mountain of some form or another. And those presences in our life that come along to remind us when we're trying to rest on a plateau that we're not there yet are, from the perspective of growth, the most important things that happen in our lives. And so now when I know I've pushed somebody off their comfort plateau, instead of feeling guilty, I give them all of the energy of my intent to have that strength to stand up and keep doing what they know in their hearts that they're supposed to be doing. And I don't waste time putting myself down for feeling guilty. I understand that that's my gift. And if I can give them a hand up and help push them up the mountain a little bit, I will. And if they're perfectly capable of doing it on their own, that's what the goal is anyway, is to empower them to do that. So I get out of the way.
Well, that sort of summarizes also, I was going to use the statement that follow the command of the heart. And this is what you are saying, that for the young people, and I had mentioned there too about sharing your view with the young and what you would tell them to do, you're basically telling them to follow their heart and to take that energy, even though it may not seem to be, quote, the energy that is everyone else's choice, but that will open doors that will allow them to fulfill in this lifetime what it is they want for this lifetime.
As easily as possible. And part of the problem in parenting turns out that parents want their children to be what they weren't, or they vicariously, if Dad never became a doctor, Dad wants Junior to be a doctor. Well, maybe Junior was born to be a gardener, and that's what his heart is saying. As parents or as mentors to other people, if we can understand that what we're doing is watering the plant of their being, not trying to make it what we think it should be, then the process of growing up and of finding what you're here to do would be a lot easier.
Okay.
All
right.
That makes sense, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, too. And it's I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I think that it's limited, so we'll just go with what would be your advice to anyone on this trip? What would you say from your experiences?
The absolute statement that you just finished with, follow the command of the heart. But I purposely put the word the in there instead of your heart to make that distinction between the heart will give a command and the mind and ego will instantly jump in and try to talk you out of it. That's why I didn't say your heart.
Okay.
The heart that you know is beyond all of your conditioning and all of your voices, and it's completely independent of anything that society has created. The heart, that place of purity. Follow the command of that place of purity within you. That's why I said the heart, not your heart.
All right. Well, this is something that we'll kind of close with that statement in a way. Follow the command of the heart. And I know there are a lot of people who journey that way, not always feeling that they've accomplished what they want or not always knowing that they did the right thing, but they knew what their heart told them to do. And I've followed that path several times in my lifetime too, so I have that sense of it, and it's something that your artwork and your energy brings up in a beautiful way. And I guess what I have to do now is to give you a very special thanks for sharing so much with me.
Thank you, Arlene.
And also asking the audience out there if they want to come and do a show, to send a question by phone or email and come be part of our wonderful AM Light presentation of the Universal Mind at Work. Each time new and different. Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you, Arlene.